Okay, so let's go ahead. We have a little shorter time than we planned. I'm John Oldham, and I'm going to moderate this Q&A period, and just will say a word or two to get us started. First of all, we've had a wonderful, really rich set of presentations that I think are wonderful. We've also had a beautiful demonstration of speaker resilience. And as I muttered to my neighbor over there, it really isn't fair to ask them to be quiet. It just isn't. So we just have to make do the best way we can. I want to make a couple of comments, and then hopefully we'll have time for discussion from everybody. Thank you, Carla, for when you started referring to the journal project, and I just want to say another word about that. It's called Borderline Personality Disorder and Emotion Dysregulation. If you just Google bpded.com, you'll get right to it. And I want to mention that because it's an open access journal. It's co-sponsored by the German DBT Society and by NEA-BPD, which Perry represents here. And it's a really nice opportunity for people to submit papers if you're interested. It's indexed in PubMed, it's peer-reviewed, and one other important point, most open access journals have an author processing charge, which is pretty hefty. We don't. We have contributions from the DBT Society in Germany to cover that, so you don't have to pay. And it's open access, full text, to anybody when it's published. So that's my little plug. The other co-editors are Martin Bovis and Christian Schmall from Germany, and it's a great opportunity. A couple of other quick comments before I just focus on each of the presenters. A word about assessment that Carla's describing the PID-5, and that's a self-assessment method that was actually developed in the process of the DSM-5 alternative model. Bob Kruger had the lead with that. Andy Skodel, Donna Bender, Michael First, and I have just finished a skid. We call it the SKID AMPT, which is a skid for the alternative model for personality disorders. So we've actually completed that, and it's going to be published very soon by APA Publishing. So it'll be a semi-structured interview like the SKID 2, but for the alternative model. So I just wanted you to know about that. Two other things. One is, the question came up about whether was a good idea or not to tell patients a diagnosis of borderline. Well, I'm fully in the camp that John Gunderson and many others are that yes, we should. And I think that it's very, very risky not to. Now, we have to be as sure as we can be, and that's part of what we're talking about. When and at what point can you be sure? But I think it's really important because we have so much information and data at this point. I'll tell you a little trick that I use because people say, let me back up. I was on the work group for the DSM-5 personality disorder group that Andy Skodel chaired and I co-chaired. Years ago, I had the luck to chair the American Psychiatric Association work group that developed evidence-based practice guidelines for the treatment of BPD. And at that time, we were kind of debating about whether the time was right. It turns out we did, and as Carla mentioned, there are a number of other practice guidelines in the UK, Australia, actually Denmark, and there's a German version and a Dutch version. All of them say the same thing in terms of treatment. But when we were thinking about the DSM process, we had a public input website, and so the first posting of the model and the second and the third, my job was to review all of the comments that came in about borderline PD. We divided up the personality disorders. And overwhelmingly, the most common comment we got was change the name. It's a stigmatizing name, let's change it. We talked about it very seriously and thought about it and decided not to do that, which was, I think, the right decision. Why? Because, in fact, it's not the name that's stigmatizing. It's how we react to the behavior by not understanding it. And if we change the name, first of all, nobody could really come up with an alternative that would be comprehensive enough. The most common was emotion dysregulation disorder. Two objections to that. One is it doesn't catch all the patients. And number two, what's the primary care doc going to do when he hears emotion dysregulation disorder? Write a prescription. And that's not the primary treatment for this disorder. So I just wanted to make a word about that, and then finally say a little trick I use. Because people say, well, what does borderline mean? And we know when it started out, it meant in the border between the psychoses and the neuroses in the old language. Well, I use a trick, and I just say to families, this is a condition that is not quite a major mood disorder. It's on the border. And it's not quite an impulse control disorder, but it's on the border. Because in fact, this is in the impulse control and in the mood disorder spectra, as opposed to the psychosis schizophrenia spectrum, which was where the idea originally came from. And that helps people, because you can also say it's not quite as bad as that, if you want to put it that way. And it kind of softens it a little bit. So that's just a tip. Okay, a quick question for each of the presenters. Carla talked about some really elegant work and also reviewed the phenomenology in terms of how we're trying to think about it. But I have one question, so she asked me to say a word about the alternative model. We don't have time to do that, but shorthand. The alternative model in section 3, it is an alternative, so keep that in mind. It's not a condition for further study. It's legit, it's official. If you like it, you can use it. Just diagnose borderline the way it's diagnosed in section 3. And how is it diagnosed? With a common template for all the conditions, and it is that there is moderate or greater impairment in functioning in 2 areas, self and interpersonal. Moderate or greater impairment in self and interpersonal functioning, and the presence of pathological personality traits. It's a generic template. Self is unpacked into identity and self-direction. Interpersonal is unpacked into empathy and intimacy. Which leads to my question. I don't think we know yet. I'd be interested in your thoughts, Carla. How well this is going to work for adolescents. And the reason I say that now, only 2 out of those 4 components need to be present at the moderate or greater level of impairment. So I have 2 questions really. One is, how well does level of impairment work in adolescence? Because sort of functioning isn't quite defined the way we think of social and occupational functioning in adults. And the second, probably more important question is, do those components really apply in a developmental stage such as adolescence? Intimacy, for example, is defined in DSM-5 section 3 in a narrative text, but it really means mutually rewarding, mature, adult, lasting, over time, relationships that can be close and durable. Well, are we really there yet in that regard? And empathy, probably that's okay. But I guess all that I'm saying is new enough for us to need to test it. Carla's been working with Michael and the rest of us to think about maybe we need to do a special version of the scans for adolescents. And so we're wrestling with that. Say a word about my question.
Let me see if we don't. I may have to take. Okay, let me take this one. So yes, I agree that for both criterion A and criterion B, there's going to have to be translation of the concept. So empathy. So he actually talked very nicely about empathy in 2-year-olds. So we know we can, and there's a lot of developmental research. So what we're going to have to draw on is the developmental research in self and other processing. So we know, theory of mind has been charted quite well. Empathy has been charted quite well. I think development of self, we know a lot about the development of self in teenagers, but the language...
What's the normative relationship?
What's the normative relationships? So even in terms of intimacy, I would, we would probably not look at romantic relationships so much as we would look at peer relationships and family relationships. So I think there'll have to be some translation work from the language that criterion A uses, and then drawing upon the developmental science to translate it, but I do think it's going to require more translational work than the SCID 2. So I think the translation of the 9 borderline criteria as in section 2 is actually very applicable to adolescents as is, but I think section 3 is going to require, and I would argue that section 3 is more nuanced, and that's a good thing. The fact that it's more challenging to use with adolescents doesn't invalidate it, but that it potentially carves nature closer at its bone, and therefore we have to actually do the developmental adaptation piece more carefully with that. So I look forward to that, John.
We're going to come over here.
All right, okay.
Yeah, come sit down.
No, I think it's a really exciting topic because it gets back to the thing about you're saying under the skin. I think it's also a little bit, it would be like just, we don't have to carve it out. So I think distinctly like, okay, well, this is for, 11 to 13 or something like that, because it also applies, the same is true when we try to upwardly extend these levels of functioning to the geriatric population. I mean, what is intimacy going to look like in old age? And so I think these issues, so what it would allow, I mean, in theory, what you could do really is to say, these are the developmental processes that apply across the lifespan. How do they unfold with maturation? How do we expect them to unfold with normative maturation? And then just looking at deviations from what's normative, depending on where the person is in their specific developmental age.
Okay, I have one for each of these, and then I want to hear from everybody else. So just a wonderful presentation. Actually, all of these really good. I just want to make a point and mention your thoughts about it. So, as I was listening to your presentation, and I've heard Peter Fonagy in many presentations over here from the library this afternoon, I hadn't thought of this before. It occurred to me. So we're talking about developmental milestones, and we're talking about development of trust, and we're talking about infant caretaker interaction, by which we usually mean mother, but we know better that to use that word anymore since it's caretaker. So then I was thinking, but every family is very complex. There are lots of players. Sometimes there's one caretaker that's supplanted with another. Sometimes there are good ones and bad ones. Sometimes there's all kinds of complexity. And so it reminded me of the difference between efficacy studies and effectiveness studies. So in some ways, an efficacy study is to look at a very, very distilled population. This treatment works for that condition. But out in the world, most patients don't even resemble those patients because they have 31 different things. So I was just trying to think about, isn't that out there as a challenge for us to then figure out how can we meaningfully apply this elegant knowledge that we're developing in a much muddier, more complicated setting?
Yeah, absolutely right. In terms of attachment research typically gets criticized because we're just looking at the mother-infant relationship, which is really one aspect of a big picture. I think what attachment researchers would a lot of times argue is most of the time in the same family environment with multiple factors involved, how the mother reflects on the child's mental states and helps the infant develop the kind of mental states that we talked about would make a difference in that infant's development. So that, I guess, points to the importance of that early attachment relationship. But attachment research definitely needs to take into account the influence of the father or grandparents and myriad of other factors as well. And it has also received criticism from cross-cultural perspective because attachment research, even though it did initially start in Uganda, a lot of times is conducted in the Western culture, which is very individualistic. And in a lot of collectivistic cultures, the way an infant starts to develop attachment looks very different. It could involve multiple people. The way individuation separation works is also very different. So there are definitely a lot of things that are not necessarily incorporated into the model that I've talked about. about, and those definitely need to be taken into account.
Okay, one more on me. Stephanie just really interesting data. I really like all your data and your heroic review of literature is very interesting. But then the Pittsburgh study is so important. Because when we talk about these kinds of concepts, the concept of predictors, it's like we talk about biomarkers in neuroscience. That's where we're looking. We're looking to have a capacity to see something early enough that's going to predict something really predictable that is going to be valid. And where I think you landed was a place that's much more consistent with a dimensional way of thinking rather than a categorical diagnostic way of thinking. So are we really going to have something wherever we find that will be a specific predictor for borderline personality disorder? I would argue, I think that's highly unlikely. And frankly, because borderline personality disorder has a lot of overlapping symptoms with a lot of other things, and the developmental trajectory growing up combined with genetic risk factors for each individual is going to be highly individualized, and the environmental experiences are going to be different. So the more likely direction may be more compatible with the RDoC effort that NIMH is proposing, which is, and Connor's been writing about this too, where is there more of a general kind of factor? So maybe what we're going to predict is emotion dysregulation. And that might be much more important for us to begin to identify, recognizing that emotion dysregulation could look like major depressive disorder, or could look like bipolar disorder, or could look like PTSD, or could look like borderline personality disorder. And what makes one become one and one the other? There may not be a sort of general rule, it may be the individual combo of genetic risk factors and environmental experiences. And it gets us into epigenetics and all kinds of things like that. I think that's an exciting way and a plausible way and a way we're kind of converging toward. Would you agree?
I think, I agree. I think one way to think about it is that the emotional dysregulation in terms of an RDoC perspective might also mirror looking at like a symptom onset as opposed to disorder onset. So it's definitely a relevant dimension of behavior that can cause people impairment and dysfunction. So yeah, I think definitely. I also what I think we might be able to do. Well, I agree with you. We will never be able to predict with 100% certainty that yes, your daughter is going to have borderline personality disorder. I mean, I really hope we never do, because then we are in some kind of weird, like, science fiction novel where people like Big Brother and weird things. So yeah, we should never be able to do that because life is very complex. But what we can do is increase our accuracy. Because right now, if we just relied on the predictors that were in the literature, we would be doing a terrible job in predicting risk. I mean, using family adversity doesn't really predict, or even trauma doesn't really predict onset of disorder, because so many people aren't affected in the same way. So there are different mechanistic processes or different developmental pathways, I think, that need to be unfolding. And so I think what we could do potentially is identify multiple pathways to the disorder, because I'm interested in distinguishing, like, I'm interested in who is going to develop BPD or severe mental illness, so that we can maybe, better prevent it, the devastating consequences. So I think that we could do like general pathways, but you're right, there will not be just one pathway.
Okay, let's hear questions from any of you, and just maybe if you have a question, come up here and take the mic.
Okay, so this one's mostly for Carla. So I'm interested in the measures and the way to test, especially in a private practice setting. And I know you went over several, and I think you spent more time on one of them, but which ones do we have access to that are easy to score and also very helpful in private practice settings?
Say who you are and where you're from.
My name is Laura Bazan from Sugar Land, and I have a private practice in Chicago.
Great. Thank you, Laura, for being here and for being interested in this. So all these measures that I talk about have varying degrees of accessibility. So the CIBPD, the interview-based measure, was developed by Mary Zanarini, and she makes it freely available for anybody who wants to use it, but she does require you to go through training to use it, and she usually does it by phone, and it's pretty easy. I don't know how often I've done that too with her. I don't know how often she trains private or clinicians. So that is a question for Mary that we will certainly ask her. The PAI, the Personality Assessment Inventory, you have to purchase through, I think, PAR. And it also just has the borderline subscale alongside a bunch of other subscales. So that is an option for you. I would recommend the Borderline Personality Disorder Feature Scale, which I can send to you tonight. The original developer of it, Nikki Creek, passed away about 2 years ago. She always made it freely available for anybody who wants to use it. People contact me, but people also contact other people who have used it and published on it to get access to the measure. But that is freely available. Usually when I send it, we send the accompanying papers to tell you, what the scientific basis of the questionnaire is, and we also send you the scoring information. Some of the other ones, the MMPI, you have to purchase. So the MMPI is used, doesn't have a whole bunch of data in adolescents, a little bit, but not a whole bunch of data. And the MSI-BPD you can use freely. So Mary Zanarini developed that as well. So that's a screening tool, and you can just email her. You can email me, and I can put you in touch with her. Andrew just arrived. Welcome, Andrew. The PBQ. How did you guys get hold of the PBQ? Okay, freely available. There's also the personality disorder questionnaire, the PDQ, that people have been using in teens. It has a lot of false positives, so I wouldn't necessarily go with that, and not a huge, I think the only study that have looked at in teens comes from Andrew's group. So yeah, at the moment, I think the BPFSC is the easiest one to use and score, and it's easily accessible, but you have those other options available as well.
Other questions, comments? Come. Yeah, but you're not on camera.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Kinski from Los Angeles, a psychologist. I have a question for you. It was very interesting that you chose major depressive disorder as a comparison to BPD, and perhaps I missed it or didn't hear. I'm wondering if you ever were thinking about considering bipolar.
So you are you're onto a very hot topic, because I think like 10 people have asked me about that in the past couple of weeks. So very timely, thank you. Yes. So one of the reasons I have chosen major depressive disorder is because I'm limited to what we have available. So we have very well characterized symptoms of major depressive disorder and chronic disorder. So those are the ones that I can best use with my sample. I would love to compare this to bipolar disorder. I think that would be incredibly important. And I only have the mania rating scale available. And so what I can do, and I'm going to do this because really I feel like this is, even if this is the best I can do at the start, right? So I will use the cut score for the mania rating scale, which will indicate a clinically significant cutoff for mania specifically. And then I can do the same analysis that I presented today. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to put it on my to-do list right over there. Okay.
I look forward to seeing
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And one other thing that we could think about in that regard, Mary and I were talking about it earlier in terms of the information that we really need more about. There's a proposal for a diagnosis called DMDD
Yes.
in the DSM-5, which is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, which emerged out of the concern that bipolar disorder was being overdiagnosed in kids.
And a lot of study was done and review of the literature, and the conclusion was that that might be indeed the case, and that there was a syndrome, maybe a diagnosis, that was labeled this, that was capturing what kids were really having, and it wasn't going to lead to a future adult bipolar disorder. But we need to know a lot more about that. Does Andrew have thoughts about that? Come up, Andrew. You've been asked to ask a question or give us info.
Well, I don't have thoughts about that. I've actually talked to Ellen Leavenworth about it, and when you ask her what she was aiming for, was actually not borderline kids at all. She was aiming for those odd kids with dysregulated aggression. So that the kind of, you all went to school with them, the young kid who was a bit odd and had temper tantrums in the playground. They're the kind that were getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So she was quite surprised when I said that, this looks a lot like borderline. And really the data only came out of her lab. And so I think it's, I think it was prematurely, I'm going on camera saying it was prematurely included in the DSM.
Can you think it was done also, I'm just wondering what her thoughts were about preventing these kids from getting dangerous treatments? I think that, what I mean? Is that was that the impetus that, yeah.
And I think in terms of, the difficulty is the treatment worse than the disease, and I think that it unleashes a whole lot of other problems. And the preliminary data I've seen on the validity of it don't look very impressive. It got tremendous overlap with all disruptive behaviour disorders. So I don't know whether it will survive.
But maybe it'll save a few kids from getting
DSM 5.1 if this comes out. So, yeah.
Good, thanks. Say who you are.
Thank you very much. I'm actually a psychiatrist from Canada. I have sampled out about 70 kids with DMD, and I'm starting to do CIDP in all of them retrospectively. So we're looking at that question hopefully over the next couple of years. But there's an overlap, but at the same time, the diagnosis is so unstable, and it really is better explained by validity rather than anything else really good. So that's interesting. I'm going to put this question out there. I don't know exactly how specific it is, but the issue I think that I'm quite passionate about is trying to get people to make the diagnosis where it's appropriate in adolescence, where there are many other problems at the same time, and we're new to this as well. So the depression issue is one of the things that I think I want to try to tackle. And in that, in clinical samples, when kids come in, most people will say, I don't want to diagnose BPD because this kid's depressed. So there's a couple of issues there. I think one issue, the measurement of depression in this population is very difficult to do. And so I don't know if we know enough about that meaning. What is the phenotype of depression in youth who will otherwise be criteria for BPD? So that's one question. And the other one is, we don't have data that I'm aware of from studies where people have treated teenagers for depression, looking at the change in their cluster B symptomatology and treatment, because most depression trials at Pittsburgh, right, it's where they'll come from, don't measure that. And so I think that's an interesting opportunity. But how do we address this problem? Because so many people who come in clinically are depressed, and many people are more comfortable treating them conventionally for depression. Is there an opportunity for us to understand anything about emotional dysregulation and those types of studies?
I can try. I think you raise a really important question, and I think those of us who know the borderline adolescent research very well, I can really not pinpoint, and that's why I love these kind of conferences, because I think all of us can go back and look at our data now, because we do have data on kids who need, and we always do it the other way around. We identify the kids who have BPD, and then we look at what are their problems. In this case, your suggestion would be, let's identify the kids with depression, and let's look at what they look like in their BPD. I do, from just interviewing these kids, and now from also the kids we're seeing in our clinic here at UH, there's a qualitative difference for us between the kids who meet criteria only for depression versus the kids who have depression plus BPD. I think if we were to do the CIBPD with the depressed kids who don't have BPD, they will, not endorse the symptoms like the kids with BPD do. And even if they do sound like they're endorsing it, they won't be able to eloquently talk about the symptoms such that we feel sure that they meet criteria. And so, it comes a little bit back to that prototype idea that we do hold on to as clinicians, that we feel BPD. What's happened to me over the last 10 years as I've been working more with these adolescent populations is that I've come to believe that what I have felt when I've interviewed an adult with BPD is the same thing I feel when I interview an adolescent with BPD. It's not any different. There are different phenotypic expressions of the disorder in adolescents, but the core disorder, if you want to call it the BPD organization that Otto Kernberg talks about, is there in a similar way between the adult and the adolescent, and that is what distinguishes for me the teen with depression versus the teen with depression and the BPD. They, for me, are very different populations, but you're quite right, we have not shown that empirically at all. So, Andrew's here, he's sitting on a ton of data.
Also, that's really, fascinating to think about. So I think if our measures of personality disorders are valid, that we can assess and validly determine a diagnosis of BPD during a major depressive episode. We should, like Carla was saying, that is, if we believe in our psychometrics, which we should, then it's possible. And so I think that's one way to kind of refute the myth that clinicians often have. The other issue about the treatment would be, it's fascinating to me to think, how are those kids who get into those trials for depression who actually have BPD, how are they responding to the treatment? I mean, I don't know. I think that's maybe slightly different than what you were asking, but I think they may. Do you know? Yeah. Go ahead. That's what I would be interested to know, because I think that's really then compelling reason to diagnose the disorder, because it's going to depression won't work.
Well, we're also running a couple of depression trials as well, and they often don't get included. That's the thing. That actually suicidal behaviour is usually an exclusion, and so you naturally are selecting for a less severe group. So I don't know that they get into trials.
It's for substance use, though. We know that if you have substance use and BPD, and you get treated just for substance use, that is going to make you more sick. You are not going to get better. That's not a good idea. So, I don't know.
Well, I don't want to gate crash this, but the other comment I had is that I think the thing that's not been discussed, sorry I wasn't here for the earlier talks, but what's not been discussed is actually clinical interviewing skills. And we can talk about all the instruments, but actually it's not that hard to distinguish state from trade if you take a careful history. And people overestimate and overcomplicate the task of separating state from trade. People with just depression will tell you that when they're not depressed, they'll tell you about their functional personality, whereas people with BPD will tell you they still have all the features, or some of the features, even when they're not depressed. So actually using a mood timeline and using the historical events on that timeline, you can usually talk to somebody about, are you usually like this, or is this something that you're only occasionally like?
I often say that if you have comorbid BPD and major depressive disorder, you can see the major depressive disorder remit, but the patient doesn't stop being borderline. And so you can really tell the difference. I totally agree. I think we're over time.
Oh yes, we are. We're right there at lunchtime, guys. So. Please catch us if you do want to talk more with us. There's some sandwich lunches, and we're absolute quiet now for lunch. And I want to give you a heads up that I think there's another graduation group coming through this afternoon.
After we eat lunch.
After we eat lunch, yes. Just as the talks begin, we'll have another group coming through. So I'm just giving you a heads up. But thanks for your patience through this morning, and please enjoy the break.